There is a signature hiding inside the Y chromosome of thousands of men named MacDonald, and for centuries, nobody could prove it meant anything at all. It was just a name, passed from father to son, the way surnames are. A convenient label, historians assumed, nothing more binding than the paperwork of clan identity, assigned as much by loyalty and geography as by blood. You took your chief's name because you lived on his land, fought under his banner, owed him rent and service. That was the accepted story of the Highland clan system for a very long time. Then geneticists went looking for something else entirely, and found a pattern that should not have been there. For generations, the story of the Scottish clans was told almost entirely through tartan, territory, and tradition. A clan was a political and military unit first, a family only in a loose, symbolic sense. Historians pointed out, correctly, that clans absorbed outsiders constantly. Defeated rivals, landless wanderers, entire smaller kin groups could be folded into a larger clan and simply take its name, no blood relation required. The word clan itself comes from the Gaelic clan, meaning children, but by the medieval period it functioned more like a feudal alliance than a bloodline. A MacDonald in the 15th century might have no more genetic connection to the original MacDonald founder than a modern employee shares DNA with a company's founder. That was the reasonable, well-supported academic consensus. But reasonable stories sometimes have small cracks in them. And this one had a strange one. Highland genealogists had long noticed something odd in the oral traditions and clan histories, an unusual insistence, repeated across unrelated clans, on descent from a small handful of semi-legendary medieval figures. Somerled, the 12th century warlord who carved out a sea kingdom across the Hebrides. Niall of the Nine Hostages, the shadowy Irish high king said to have fathered dynasties on both sides of the Irish Sea. Calaways, an even older, half-mythical warrior ancestor claimed by multiple unrelated-seeming lineages. Clan chiefs recited these names with total confidence, generation after generation, the way you might recite a national founding myth. Historians treated the claims the way they treated most medieval genealogy, as flattering fiction, political ancestry shopping dressed up as fact. Nobody expected the genome to take the myths seriously. The tool that changed the conversation was the Y chromosome, the piece of DNA passed almost unchanged from father to son, generation after generation, exactly the way a surname is passed down in most European naming traditions. That overlap is what made Highland surnames scientifically interesting in the first place. If a surname really did track an unbroken paternal line back to a single founder, the men carrying that surname today should share a distinctive, traceable Y chromosome signature. If the surname was mostly a political label, adopted by unrelated families over centuries, that signature should be scattered and inconsistent. The genome, unlike a charter or a chief's boast, does not care what a family wants to believe about itself. In the early 2000s, researchers led by geneticist Brian Sykes, and later a more rigorous study published by Turi King and colleagues, began sampling Y chromosome DNA from men bearing surnames associated with the old Highland warlord Somerled, MacDonald, MacDougall, McAllister, and related names, families who had claimed common descent from him for 800 years. The expectation, going in, was mild skepticism. Clan genealogy was assumed to be mostly myth-making. That is not what the data showed. A significant cluster of men carrying Somerled-linked surnames shared an extremely rare and distinctive Y chromosome signature, one occurring at a frequency far too high to be coincidence, and structured in a pattern consistent with descent from a single male ancestor roughly the right number of generations back to match the historical Somerled. The study did not simply fail to disprove the legend. It produced a result the researchers themselves described with real caution and real surprise. If genetics can catch a myth telling the truth once, you start wondering how many other clan legends were never checked properly at all, which is part of why I keep coming back to stories like this, and why it might be worth staying subscribed for whichever clan or bloodline gets examined next. Because Somerled was not the only name the genome seemed to remember. A separate and much larger genetic signature, unrelated to the Somerled lineage, turned up across Ireland and Scotland among men carrying surnames like O'Neill, McLaughlin, Gallagher, Boyle, Doherty, Bradley, and Devlin, surnames tied by tradition to the semi-legendary Neil of the Nine Hostages. Researchers estimated that an extraordinary number of men across Ireland, Scotland, and the diaspora carry this same Y chromosome marker, again consistent with descent from a single prolific male ancestor living around the historically plausible period for Neil's dynasty. One study suggested the lineage could account for a noticeably large share of men in northwest Ireland alone, a claim that startled even the researchers who published it. That was not a confirmation. It was a complication. Because a signal this strong raises an uncomfortable question the old story never had to answer. If surname and biological descent really do line up this cleanly for some clans, why does the historical record insist clans were loose political alliances open to outsiders? Both things, it turns out, can be true, and reconciling them is where the real investigation begins. 3 explanations sit on the table, and none of them cancel each other out. The first is founder effect combined with dynastic reproductive advantage. A powerful warlord or king, with multiple wives, extensive territory, and generations of male descendants who each went on to found their own sublineages, could mathematically produce an enormous number of Y chromosome descendants within a few centuries, especially in a society where powerful men had disproportionate access to marriage and offspring. This is not myth. It is demography, and it has been documented elsewhere in history, most famously in Y chromosome studies linked to Genghis Khan's descendants across Central Asia. The second is selective adoption of surnames by genuinely related subbranches, meaning the outsiders folded into a clan model may apply less often than assumed. Many so-called client families may have actually been distant cousins, junior branches of the same paternal line, already loosely related before they formally took the clan name, which would preserve genetic continuity even as political structure looked flexible from the outside. The third, and the one historians resist the most, is that the oral genealogies, dismissed for so long as flattering invention, may have been more accurate, or at least more anchored in real memory, than modern scholarship gave them credit for. Illiterate, pre-modern societies often maintained extraordinarily precise oral records of lineage, because lineage determined land rights, inheritance, and status. The written record may have underestimated Highland memory, not overestimated it. The landmark moment that forced historians to take all of this seriously came when the Somerled and Neil findings were cross-checked against broader Y chromosome surveys of Scotland and Ireland, larger sample sets, wider geographic sampling, and comparison against control groups of unrelated surnames with no genealogical claim to either lineage. The control groups showed exactly what you would expect from random, politically assembled clans. Scattered, inconsistent Y DNA with no shared founder signal. The Somerled and Neil surname groups did not. The contrast between the two datasets was the strongest evidence yet that at least some Highland and Irish surname traditions were not folklore dressed up as genealogy. They were, in a genetic sense, closer to literal family trees than anyone in academic history had been willing to admit. Here is the twist the data actually delivered. It was not that DNA proved the clan chiefs right about everything. It was not even that DNA proved them right about most things. The majority of Highland surname groups tested show exactly the scattered, multiple origin pattern historians predicted, confirming that most clans really were political alliances more than bloodlines. The twist is narrower and stranger than that. A small number of specific, ancient, half-legendary warrior figures, the ones everyone assumed were the most exaggerated, the most obviously mythologized, turned out to have left a real, measurable, traceable genetic footprint, while the more modest, plausible-sounding clan founders often did not. The myth was not more honest than history in general. It was more honest in exactly the cases where nobody expected it to be. That reversal matters beyond Scotland. It suggests that oral tradition and written history do not simply compete for accuracy, with writing always winning. Sometimes the story a culture insists on repeating, generation after generation, in defiance of political convenience, is doing something a land charter cannot do, preserving a biological memory that no one alive could have verified, but that turns out to be measurably, improbably real. Human ancestry is not a single ledger written once and trusted forever. It exists in at least 2 archives, the documents kept by the powerful, and the genome kept by the body, and they do not always agree on what mattered. Picture the west coast of Scotland on a grey autumn morning, the sound of Islay churning below a headland where Somerled's longships are said to have gathered 8 centuries ago. Mist sits low over sea locks that have not changed shape since his fleet passed through them. Somewhere inland, in a stone church graveyard, generations of men who never met each other, separated by 500 years and thousands of miles once the diaspora scattered them to Ulster, to Nova Scotia, to the Carolinas, carried inside every cell of their bodies a molecular echo of a warlord most of them never studied in school. They knew him only as a name repeated at a funeral, or carved on a family crest nobody quite understood anymore. The DNA did not need them to remember correctly. It simply kept counting. None of this means every Highland surname carries proof of warrior descent, and researchers are careful to say so. The vast majority of clan surnames show no such signal, and genetic testing cannot, on its own, confirm any individual family's specific line back to a named historical figure. What it means is something quieter and, in its way, more remarkable, that a handful of names Western scholarship spent 2 centuries treating as flattering fiction were, in a narrow and specific sense the genome could actually measure, telling something closer to the truth than the skeptics. The old story said clans were mostly political theater wearing the costume of family. The DNA did not simply confirm that story or overturn it. It did something rare. It found the seams, the exact places where myth and biology happened to line up, and left everything else exactly as uncertain, and exactly as human, as it always was. The map of the Highlands was never wrong to be complicated. It was only wrong to assume complexity meant the old stories couldn't, here and there, also be true. If you want more of these moments, where the science quietly agrees with the legend nobody believed, tell me in the comments which name or clan deserves to be examined next.